Welcome to the State Arboretum of Virginia. My name is Ty Ralston. I'm the curator here. We are part of the University of Virginia, but we are about 2 hours north of Charlottesville, located in the top of the Shenandoah Valley in a little town called Boyce, Virginia. We are a research facility, but we are also a public garden, and there are over 5,000 trees and shrubs that you can come and stroll around and see here. We also have various gardens as well as natural areas where you can learn about the local ecology as well as learn about cultural uses of plants. There are things for you to see and do here all year round. So if you were to come in the spring, of course that's when all the trees would be in flower and the insects would be coming out for the spring and the birds would be returning from their winter. In the summer it would be the fields and the gardens all full of flowers, and you would see the insects come out and collect the pollen and the nectar or eat the leaves to turn plants into insects, and you would see the birds come out and turn the insects into more birds. But what about the fall, like now? What happens out here? Of course, everybody knows that this is the time for the foliage, so you could come out as the maples start to turn, and the sassafras, and my favorite, the sweet gum or black gum. These are all wonderful trees to see turning. But there are other things happening too. So this is the time, of course, that the squirrels are going crazy collecting the acorns and the walnuts and the hickory nuts and the chestnuts to store for the winter. It is also the time for the trees to finish swelling their fruits for the birds to take and for their winter journeys. You may see the hummingbirds coming through and feeding on the hummingbird sage, sipping the nectar from the gardens here to fuel their journeys all the way to Central America. You may even see the monarch butterflies that are on their migration to Mexico, stopping in for some nectar on some of their favorite flowers that are still blooming here in the fall. So there are always things to do here at the State Arboretum, and I hope now you can come and learn a little bit about what goes on here, and we'll take you on a little tour of the Arboretum with some of the people that know the gardens best.
Hi, we're at the Pollination Garden. My name is Carrie Whitacre. I'm the Assistant Curator of Herbaceous Gardens. The Pollination Garden has recently been renovated. Each bed really represents one of our most common pollinators. Behind me, the bed is for bees, and there are beds dedicated to butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, and even flies. And another nice bed that is dedicated to explaining to people what they can do at home for pollinators. The other nice thing about the Pollination Garden is to observe all of the interactions that take place between the plants and the pollinators themselves. One of the plants that is blooming now, of course we're getting later into the fall, so a lot of things have already done their blooming, but one of the plants that's blooming now is the pink turtlehead. The turtlehead's flowers are shaped that only the largest bees, usually our bumblebees, can actually get inside the flower to get the pollen and nectar. And they have to do so by pushing down the petals at the bottom to get into the area where the nectar and pollen are. But it's kind of fun to watch the bigger bees wiggle in and out of these flowers. This is the home pollinator bed, and what this bed really does is try to explain to visitors, show them examples of plants that they can grow at home for pollinators. This little beauty is one of my favorites, blooming now, later in the fall. This is a dwarf goldenrod, and this plant, because of its small flowers, abundance of small flowers, attracts an abundance of small pollinators. Some of the tiniest bees that we have, small wasps and flies. Also the occasional butterfly. This is obedient plant. This is another fall bloomer here in the Pollination Garden. And the interesting thing about this plant is that the bees can't quite sometimes fit into that flower, so they will actually come around to the back, bite into the back of the flower, and take the nectar, or rob the nectar. So it's kind of an interesting interaction that the bees do when they can't quite fit their big bodies inside the flowers. This is the herb garden behind me, and as you can see, it's a more formal garden. This is actually the oldest garden we have at Blandy. It was started sometime in the 70s by volunteers. This bed is part of what we call the kitchen bed, and this demonstrates some of our easiest to grow herbs and probably some of our most popular herbs to use in cooking. I'm sitting here amongst different thymes, French tarragon, sage, rosemary, oregano. All of these herbs are fairly easy to grow. They're hardy in our area. You don't need, obviously, a very big space to grow them all even together, and a lot of these grow well in containers. This ground cover is St. John's wort, and this is the type of St. John's wort that the herbal supplement that people sometimes use to treat minor depression comes from. This is a more traditional herb, which I think we're probably all familiar with. This is spearmint. And medicinally, this is used in herbal teas to treat colds and chest congestion. This plant is called Rosa rugosa, and this rose is the plant that produces rose hips that are often used in herbal teas. So not all roses actually produce the hips. It's this particular species that does. The herb garden is also a wonderful place to use your senses. You can touch, pulling some of this rosemary and then smelling that fantastic fragrance. The different textures of leaves, like this lemon balm, which has a rough texture and obviously smells like lemon. So it's really a fun place to explore, especially with your hands and your nose.
My name is Jack Monsbed. I'm the assistant curator here at Blandy Experimental Farm at the State Arboretum of Virginia. And my job is to take care of the native plant trail. The native plant trail is a series of native habitats, native plant habitats, that spans about 30 acres. There's about a half-a-mile trail that goes straight through all the different habitats that we have, including a woodland habitat, a meadow habitat, and a wetland habitat. So here we kind of maintain it as a sort of natural wildflower garden. We do a lot of gardening ourselves, and we also let nature take over, and we work with the plants that naturally recruit there. So we have a lot of different, wide variety of native plants throughout the trail, and they provide home to a lot of different animals, insects, and various other wildlife. So I'm going to take you on a little brief tour of the native plant trail here. I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff to see here in the fall along the native plant trail. So we'll get started. So here we are in the woodland section of the native plant trail. And one of the cool things I wanted to show off to you today was one of our trees. It's one of my favorite trees in the woodlands, a native tree. It's called the pawpaw tree. Now the reason this tree is so cool is because it actually produces edible fruits every year in the fall. Right around this time, they're perfectly ripe. So you'll see them come into ripeness usually sometime in September. So as early as late August or as late as early October, sometime in there, you'll see this tree produces a lot of excellent fruit. So how to identify a pawpaw tree is they kind of have these long branches, and on the ends of each branch they'll have between 5 and 9 leaflets. And the leaflets you can see are kind of these big, round, oblong leaflets. And they only grow along the ends of the branches. These trees don't get very tall. This one behind me is probably only about 20 feet tall, and that's about as big as they get. They won't get a whole lot bigger than that, but they will put out a lot of suckers, and they tend to form patches. They tend to form pretty dense patches. So this tree right now doesn't have any fruit on it, but we found some fruit earlier, and this is what a pawpaw fruit looks like. So here we have a fruit from the pawpaw tree. This is a very average sized fruit for what normally grows on the pawpaw trees. If you do go out and decide to pick some fruit, you should feel it before you pick it, and it should feel kind of soft. You should be able to feel a nice little bit of give when you squish it. And that'll tell you that it's really nice and ripe. If it's very firm, it's probably not ready yet, and it won't be very sweet. So the pawpaw it's a delicious fruit, but you don't want to eat the skin. So the best way to prepare it is once you find one, you get a knife, and usually want to cut right along the outside. And you want to cut all the way around like I'm doing here. The reason for that is because there are seeds inside. There's a bunch of big seeds right in the middle, so you won't be able to cut all the way through. You should cut all the way around the outside instead. So once you cut around the outside, you should be able to pull it apart pretty easily if it's ripe. And that's what it looks like inside. So you can see here there are several pretty big seeds. This is one of the seeds. It's still got some flesh on it. But you know, they're not too big of a problem. You can pull them out of the way pretty easily, you know, or you can just eat them and spit out the seeds as you go. But once you get some of the seeds out, you have all that nice juicy yellow pawpaw flesh in there, and that's really good for eating. Now, if you want to use this in any sort of baked goods or anything, you can also do that. You just want to peel the outside first, get the seeds out, and you can just use just the raw flesh part. But as it is now, it's really good for eating fresh. So we can take a bite here. And that's a really delicious fruit. It kind of tastes a little bit like mango. Kind of has like a mango-y tang to it with a more custardy consistency. So really good eating, great food to find out on the trail, and one of our favorite native plants. Definitely a great feature of Virginia every year in the fall. So here we are in another section of the Native Plant Trail woodland. We're a little bit farther along the trail, and I want to take the time to showcase some of our great flowers that you can see specifically in autumn in the woodland. A lot of people think that forests and woodlands are only really good for flowers in the spring because they have a lot of spring ephemerals. You know, we have Virginia bluebells, we have blue phlox, we have trillium. But in the fall, there's a lot of really cool wildflowers as well. So right now, I'm sitting right behind this beautiful patch of white snakeroot. This is a native plant, it's native to Virginia, and it really likes to grow along woodland edges. So areas with partial shade, or you know, just in the very edges of natural areas of forests and whatnot. And it's a real hit with the pollinators. You can see there's a lot of little sweat bees and flies buzzing around it right now. And it's overall a really nice plant. It's really adaptable to grow in a lot of different areas. One thing that's kind of interesting about the well is that while it's a really beautiful plant, its leaves and its flowers are all poisonous, especially to cattle. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with pokeweed. This is a plant that some people, as you can tell by its name, some people consider it just a weed and not any value, and they'll pull it up a lot of the time. But it actually looks really nice if you can let it grow and if you can get it in the right spot. So this plant behind me is probably 6 feet tall. It can get to be quite impressively tall. It has nice big leaves on it, these beautiful purple stems, and it of course produces these dark purple berries later in the fall. If you come earlier in the summer, these would be nice tufts of big white flowers hanging here instead. But these berries are really cool. They are really attractive to birds. Birds see this dark purple color, and that just looks like the most delicious thing to them, so they'll come and they'll eat these seeds and disperse them all over the place. This plant, however, is also poisonous, much like the white snakeroot here. The berries and the stems are very poisonous. The leaves have some poison in them as well. That actually hasn't stopped people from eating them. So historically, early settlers and stuff to Virginia discovered that this plant was edible if you actually cut down the plant when it's young, take its young leaves, you have to boil them 2 or 3 times with different changes of water, and then that actually gets rid of the toxins. Each time you boil it, it removes some of the toxins. And then you can eat what's left in a salad or any sort of greens dish. It seems like a lot of work for what essentially is a salad, but it's just kind of an interesting practice that people used to do for this plant. So next I think we'll head out into the meadow. We'll take a look at some of the grasses out there. The meadow is mostly made of grassland out here, so we had planted, it was established about 20 years ago, and we planted a lot of really tall, warm season grasses, which you can see just swaying in the breeze beautifully behind me here. I'm going to show you how to identify just a few of these grasses. So this one right here, that's right in front of me, this is Indian grass. The scientific name for this is Sorghastrum nutans. And it gets very tall. As you can see, it's almost as tall as me. It's probably about 5.5 feet tall. I've seen these get up to 8, even 9 feet tall sometimes. They get very, very large. You can identify this one because it has just this really interesting, just kind of yellow-orange tuft on the top. So this is the only one that you'll see that's really tall like this out here with this nice big tuft of flowers on the top. And those are the plant's flowers. Those will eventually turn into seed, and that's how it kind of spreads itself throughout the landscape. It's a really nice grass and just really good to see these in nice big groups. The other grass that we have here is big blue stem. So this right here is big blue stem. This one you can tell because it has these kind of 3 individual little spikelets of flowers on the top of each stem. So it'll have 3, sometimes it'll have 2 or 4, but it's usually roughly around 3 spikelets of flowers. And it kind of looks like a turkey's foot is how some people refer to that. So this grass, you can see right now it's turned nice and purple. It is called blue stem because earlier in the growing season the stem looks more bluish, but it has a lot of really interesting color in it. And has actually a very high value for cattle. So out in the west where there's bigger grasslands, this is a prime, some people even call it cattle's ice cream because it's such a good high quality food stuff for grazing. All right, so here we are out at the lower section of our meadow. And behind me, this is just one of my favorite landscapes throughout the Native Plant Trail. It's beautiful pretty much from midsummer onwards. It just has a wide variety of wildflowers, all native wildflowers just kind of growing in together and just forming a beautiful, diverse planting of wildflowers. So down here you see this nice yellow plant is goldenrod. This is tall goldenrod specifically is the species of goldenrod that it is. And you can see that's all throughout behind me. Over here we have one of my favorite late bloomers. This is called New England aster. And this one, as with the goldenrod, is also a really hit with the pollinators. The wasps and the bees and stuff love it. And then we have plants like this guy right here who he's turned brown so now for the season, but this is Vernonia. Earlier in the season he's got these really deep purple flowers on him, and there's quite a lot of this behind me. However, even still, while it's brown, it still is, adds a nice look to the planting. And then back there behind me, you can see kind of the billowy, fluffy gray tops of flowers back there. Those are all Joe Pye weed. So those flowers are a pale pink, a dusty pale pink earlier in the summer. But even now, in fall, they've kind of turned brown, but they still add a nice visual aesthetic to the whole planting. So yeah, this is just one of my favorite areas, just a really wide variety of plants, really tall, really impressive, and always good to come back here and see what the pollinators are doing, how the birds are interacting with it, and just enjoying the flowers themselves throughout the season.
Hello everyone, my name is Candace Lutzow-Felling. I'm the Director of Education Programs here at the Arboretum. We develop and teach programs for students from preschool age all the way through grade 12. And one of our favorite places to bring students is this wonderful pollination garden. Now imagine if you're 5, 6, or even 7 years old. What do you think the first thing you might see when you're here? Colors. Look at all of those colors. And that is one of the great things about this garden. We use it to teach kids that, actually help kids realize that flowers come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. So come with me and we're going to look a little bit closer at some of the flowers that are here. How about that? I'm standing in front of this beautiful red salvia. I'm over 5 feet tall. Imagine if you're a child and you're about this tall. What are you seeing at your eye level? You're seeing these beautiful red flowers and the leaves. And we have the kids look very closely at the shape of the flower, and it's so atypical to what you have kids typically draw for a flower, which kind of looks like a center circle with discs sticking out, almost like rays of the sun. But this is shaped like a tube. And we have the kids, we give each of the students this special scientific tool, which is my favorite scientific tool. It's called a hand lens. And what it does is it magnifies whatever you look at. You take this tool, you put it up at your eye level and bring it down to look at a flower, and it magnifies it so it's 10 times larger than your eye would see. And what happens is the children are astounded because they say, "Oh my goodness, there's purple dots on the ends of the flower," and that's the pollen. And so then we ask them, what is that? And why do flowers have pollen? Which leads us then to ask the children, why are there so many different insects visiting these flowers, and what are they doing when they visit? Another thing we have the kids look at is the shape and texture of the leaves. Children are very sensory. They learn a lot by touching, smelling, but these leaves are really kind of rough and fuzzy. The leaves back here are very smooth, and notice how different in shape they are to the salvia leaves. And that's also something for children to become aware of. And once they begin to be aware of all these amazing details that plants have, they want to run around this whole garden and look at all the plants for themselves. Now we're in our native plant trail, one of our favorite outdoor classroom areas at the Arboretum. Here we teach students to observe how a forest has structure. And we emphasize 3 different structural layers of a forest. Of course, the scientists would emphasize more layers, but for students, 3 layers is good. And we have the kids look at the ground level and try to identify and find 3 different plants and 3 different animals that use the ground. And so when they look closely, and they use their wonderful scientific tool, the hand lens, they see salamanders, snakes sometimes, all sorts of insects, sometimes squirrels, or evidence that squirrels were here. And they record those on their data sheets. And then we bring them up 1 layer to the mid-level of the forest where you see shrubs and small trees like this dogwood here. And we ask them to look closely and think about what evidence of animals using the mid-layer can you find. And they often see or hear, as you can hear, the birds. They'll see squirrels scrambling up the trees. And of course, there's lots of insects that use these trees for food and even for habitat. And then the next and final layer is the top layer, which we call the overstory. So the kids look way up, and then they ask, well, how can we tell you what's way up high? We can't climb up there. It's like, no, but do you perhaps find some houses that are built up there? And when they look carefully, they commonly see squirrel nests in here, or they may see hawks flying overhead up in the canopy area. And of course, there's a lot of birds, and they're squirrels. So it helps them to understand how diverse a forest is in terms of the plants that live here and the habitats that the forest creates for other animals. Well, I hope you've enjoyed your tour of the Arboretum. We have many more areas for you to come here and explore, and we do invite you to come. We're open 365 days of the year from dawn to dusk, and we don't charge any admission fee. So please come with your family, with your friends. You can even bring your dog as long as your dog's on a leash. You can even bring your horse and ride some of our horse trails. We also have programs for adults if you're interested. You can go to our website and look at our offerings on the main page of our website. Some of the programs are here at Blandy, but we have many programs that you can participate in remotely wherever you are. So we invite you to look at those. If you're interested in activities that you can share with your children, your grandchildren, your friends' children, we have activities that we've created just for you that are on our website. Go there and look for family activities. And if you're interested in following us on Facebook, we'd love to have you do that. Every day we post something new that we observe at the Arboretum. And so come on out and see us sometime virtually or in person.